Redditors who work at remote places like forest officers, oil rig workers, etc. What creepy things have you noticed while at work? I worked at a public forest. One day we had someone report a dead animal on the side of one of our trails. A few of us from the front desk hiked out to see what it was. It looked like a giant piece of liver, maybe? Just a pile of smooth red meat, no blood around. And it was wrapped up in a t-shirt, with some coins scattered around it. We called our rangers to go check it out, and one of them was pretty sure it was a placenta. The weird part is, you have to check in through a front desk. So someone either snuck a placenta liver in or gave live birth, removed an organ on our trails. We never got an answer on what the pile of meat was, how it got there, or why. I do a lot of stream work, so I spend time out in pretty rural areas walking streams and rivers. Once my co-worker and I were working in a more urban environment and came across what we initially thought was a body, which of course triggered oh crap from us. But it ended up being a firefighter's dummy that had fallen down a hill. We felt pretty dumb. Other notable things include a small grave in the middle of nowhere for someone's dog, pretty sad, and a stuffed rabbit with shotgun shells placed where its eyes should be, a mannequin very purposely placed in a chair in the middle of the woods, and lots of little random altars. I also did work in Myrtle Beach, what a heck hole, and accidentally walked into an inhabited homeless camp. I was peering into a stormwater grate when I looked up and saw a homeless person standing in his shelter staring at us and saying nothing. I felt like I was trespassing, so we quietly left. I used to work in a ship and were usually gone 3 to 10 months at a time. I worked night shift, so this meant I would sleep in the sleeping quarters during daytime with either just me or a handful of other crew members, where usually there'd be 20 to 30 of us in there. It wasn't so bad. Actually, I really liked because it's a lot more peaceful sleeping during the day. You don't hear anybody else snoring or someone's footsteps because they have to pee or something like that. All you can hear is the light creak of the walls and the floors of the ship, and all you can feel is the sway of it on the ocean. A bit haunting and creepy if you really think about it, but I like it. All that ended when there was a short period of time was literally only 2 of us in there, or at least that's what I thought. I started hearing light taps across the room. At first they were light taps, then it would get a bit faster. Sometimes it'll get a bit louder. I'd ignore it if it wasn't so utterly annoying. I look at where the other guy is sleeping and he seems to be fast asleep, accompanied by his light snoring. Second day, there it goes again. I tried to follow the sound, but for some reason it bounced around the room like an echo. Eventually it comes to an abrupt halt, so I try to sleep it off. During work at night I tried to ask my mate about it, but he said he was too tired to even notice. I guess I'm alone on this pursuit. Third day I take my pursuit one step further by not sleeping right away. I'd be fully awake when it starts, so I'll have a better chance of discovering the source. There it goes again. This time I go from one empty rack to the next until finally it was loud as frick. Tapping in progress. My heart was thumping like a jackhammer. I pulled the curtain to the side. There laid the biggest dude I've ever seen on the ship, holding his dong mid-stroke. You have no idea the speech I prepared for this guy, in my head, for keeping me up for several days, but at that exact moment I had no idea what to say. Of course I gave out a small yelp, which didn't help the situation. I never thought I'd be locking eyes with another dude while he's gripping his dong when I began this honorable pursuit. With the current situation, I mustered my best attempt at displaying my annoyance. It somehow came out as an apology, followed by "I keep hearing tapping noises." He hadn't said anything yet, but at that exact moment, I realized that his elbow, that which belonged to the fapping arm, is resting right on the wall, probably banging on it over and over and over. I didn't wait for a reply. I nodded my head, kind of rolled my eye, and walked away. It will never be easy trying to avoid a big guy like him every day in the same sleeping quarters. That's pretty much every night on a Navy ship. I work on North Sea oil rigs on an ad hoc basis, off the coast of Scotland. Wouldn't say anything was particularly paranormal creepy, but it can be very unsettling weird place. Fog can come rolling in out of nowhere, and other rigs you can see off the sides can disappear in front of your eyes. Sometimes you can't see the walkway 6 feet in front of you, or if you're walking over grating you can't see the sea below your feet, about 60 meters down from feck to sea, but you can hear it, albeit muffled. The fog can roll in over the course of a few minutes too, so a perfectly clear day becomes pea soup. You can also feel the rig moving, swaying on high winds, rough seas, even though it's a fixed leg platform. Very unnerving to feel your office swaying when it shouldn't be. My last trip was my first ever night shift and I found it particularly unsettling as you've got the background noise of the plant, but I walked around the whole rig without seeing another living soul for the whole shift. Usually there are about 130 people on board, although smaller rigs have smaller head counts. Usually once a trip I am hit by this awareness that you are just very isolated and in the middle of nowhere. Most rigs I've worked on are an hour's chopper ride from land, so if things go wrong it can escalate very quickly. On our drill ship that was built in China, we noticed on the drawings there was a room. We went to look at it and couldn't find an entrance, but the spacing was obvious there was an extra room. It might not sound so creepy unless you've been in these shipyards where two things are known to happen. Stowaways, although I doubt it in this case, but also hundreds of workers at any given time following orders blindly. So we confirmed that the room had all 6 sides, yet not a single weld on the outside. There is only one way this could have happened, and I am sure you're starting to get it now. They must have welded from the inside for this room and then realized they had no way out upon completion if the gases didn't kill them first. It's extremely heavy around that room. People say they hear things. I have definitely. This isn't some old ship either. I rode this ship from China to Amsterdam after completion and then the maiden voyage to America. I guess it happens quick. I'm a little late to this thread, but I hope this doesn't get buried because this story still haunts me. I worked as the county historic preservationist in southern Appalachia, working on the buildings and properties the county owned. One of the benefits included with my job was living on site at one of the historic properties. The historic house was an imposing brick mansion built in the 1810s and I lived in a small caretaker's house about 20 feet away. This was in the backwoods. So to deter trespassing and vandalism, the county had built an 8-foot tall fence around the entire 5-acre parcel and put barbed wire on top of the fence. I mention this all just to show it was basically impossible for anyone, or anything, to jump or climb over the fencing and onto the property. One night, after working late at another property, I pulled up to my entrance gate, let myself in, locked it behind me and then drove the 100 yards down the gravel road to my house. There were no lights on the property, so I could only see by my headlights. As I turned my car around the corner of one of the outbuildings and parked it, my lights shone on a thing that I still have a hard time describing effectively. It was the size of a deer, but with long spindly legs and long shaggy hair, almost like a taller maned wolf. If you've ever seen pictures of one of those, that alone shook me, as there was no way something of that size should have been able to get through or over my fencing. What follows is absolutely true. I got out of my car to get a better look at what the heck the thing was, and as I opened the door and got out, the thing took off running away, not on 4 legs, but on 2. I literally watched this thing raise its back up, stand at full height on its back legs and sprint away. I absolutely freaked out at that point, grabbed my maglite and my shotgun from inside and tried to find the thing again. There was no trace, no tracks or anything. I have no idea how it got in or out of my property. I didn't sleep at all that night, just sat on my couch with my shotgun watching my front door, hoping that whatever I saw didn't come back and burst in. I cannot explain what the heck I saw that night, but it still raises the hair on my neck every time I think about it. Oh god, that was absolutely a Wendigo. When I was a kid living in Queensland, Australia, I used to bush bash, meaning walk off the beaten track through thick scrub. I knew the national park my house backed onto like the back of my hand. I knew from the topography where I was at all times. Both my parents were ex-military and had a sort of hands-off, trusting me even as young as 12 to venture off on my own into the wilderness. So I could just pack a lunch, and my sister and neighborhood friend would come with. We'd head off early in the morning, returning just before sunset usually. Once, when I, the oldest, was about 14, we had been following creek beds and bashing over heavily forested hills towards an area I'd never been. We came down a hill, through a gully full of ferns and followed a dry creek bed for another hour. The sides of the creek became steep and rocky. Before long we were passing through a gorge. As we emerged from the gorge, we noticed what looked like a dwelling. Being idiot kids, we wanted to see what was up. It looked abandoned at first, but as we got closer we saw that tarps had been affixed to the ramshackle structure. Chicken wire surrounded what looked like a pen just outside. As my eyes traveled across it, I suddenly caught another pair of eyes looking directly back at me, a Rottweiler. We started slowly edging back away from the property, but it was too late. The dog started going nuts and, worried that it was coming after us, or at least alerting the persons living in the hut, we bolted. I went back to the area a few times, but not too close to the abode itself, and found discarded bones from small game and other bits and pieces, spent .22 casings and such. As an adult and knowing the area, it's very likely we stumbled across either a homeless person camping out, or a M-Lab, as the area, as I would find out as an adult, was absolutely riddled with M-Labs. I work for a power company restoring power after a storm. Was working when a lady came up complaining that her power went out. We explained to her that's why we were there and she should have power back soon. She said, "Oh good, my son went down in the basement and now I can't find him." I went with her with a flashlight down the road to a rundown house that was partially caved in. She walked inside and I went to follow. As soon as I walked into the door she disappeared from my sight and I called for her multiple times. No one responded, so I ran back to our work truck to call for help. A man that was living on her street called to me asking what's wrong and I told him the situation. He looked at me with a cold stare and said a mom and her son died in that house 4 years ago. I'm still shook to this day. It's trippy that she knew about the power being out, like she used that opportunity to make herself known. I'd flip the frick out. Used to be a supervisor for a janitorial company and a couple times a week I had to go to a middle school and clean their hallway floors and gymnasium with a Zamboni type vehicle that mopped and scrubbed the floor. When I was there I had the whole school to myself. Used to get finished quickly and go to the library and read while eating my dinner. Well, one morning after being there, I get a call from school security and they want me to come in. When I get there I see a police car too. Oh, I think. They ask me a few questions like, did you notice anything out of the ordinary or strange while you were here last night? No, I hadn't. Usually have headphones in. Security then shows me camera footage of someone breaking into one of the classrooms while I was riding the Zamboni not far away. I was there for another 2 hours. Nothing was stolen. But the worst part was they didn't have footage of the person leaving. They didn't go out the way they came in, and police had to sweep the entire school. Never did find out what happened with that one. My oldest brother used to work the overnight sprinklers on a golf course. He took me out one time just for fun, and as we were driving uphill on a fairway, a figure of a lady appeared in the headlights at the top of the hill. My brother steered a little to the left of her and kept driving right on by. I stared right into her eyes as we drove by and she stared back. Her eyes glowed like a cat in the night. As soon as we were out of voice range I asked my brother what the heck was that. He calmly responded, "Yay. She lives on the golf course and likes to terrorize the workers from time to time. I usually see her out here once a week." Alright. Cool. Cool. Yay. She lives on the golf course and likes to terrorize the workers from time to time. I usually see her out here once a week. Not sure what worries me the most. The fact that we're talking about a mysterious lady with glowing eyes in the middle of the golf course, or the fact that your brother talked about it very casually, considering everything. I used to work out in the woods in Florida a lot. Creepiest thing would be this day we were working near Big Cypress, tramping through the brush all day. At the end of the day my co-worker and I do a quick drive through of some of the property and realize the place was absolutely infested with water moccasins. We had been unknowingly essentially walking around a giant water moccasin pit all day. That one kinda fricked me up. I'm not sure this counts, but I'm a teacher at an urban public school and was at work late grading and getting ready for the next day. Time had kind of flown by and before I knew it, it was 7 PM. I start packing up to leave in a building that is, in theory, locked and empty besides me, when our Alice alarm goes off, indicating an armed intruder in the building. I am 1, alone 2, young 3, freaked AF because I am absolutely not ready to fight a gunman over my lesson plans. I book it out of the school and dive into my car, hearing the alarm blaring the entire time. I peel out the parking lot and can see in my rear view the alarm lights still flashing and debate never going back. Cause frick that LMAO. Turns out they were doing routine maintenance and didn't send out an email to the teachers. We were wrapping up for the day in northern Canada. I am fueling up the side boom. I'm all by myself at this point cause I was tired of listening to the laborers whine of the cold, so I told them I would take care of the rest. Think bulldozer with no blade but a giant metal boom on the side that we use to razor and lower pipe. It's February, so pitch black. I keep hearing some weird sound. I can't quite hear it cause the pump is too loud. I search around a couple times and see nothing. I get in the truck and take off, drive past the front of the side boom to see a cougar sitting on top of a dirt pile 15 feet away. The damn thing was just watching me there and probably could have ended me without me even realizing it. I've never seen a cougar in the wild before and it's hard to understand just how big they are and how powerful until you see one up close. That thing leaped off the 6 featuring pile and probably didn't touch ground for 15-20 featuring. It's terrifying to think something so big and powerful could just be sitting there deciding if they want to make you dinner. When I was 15 years old, I was doing my 4 AM newspaper delivery round on bicycle. I was driving into the garden of this one subscriber where I saw 2 guys with flashlights looking through the windows of the house. I was a bit in shock and just said good morning guys. They were just as much in shock and an awkward silence followed. I tried to break the silence by asking if I could pass them to deliver the newspaper through the door. One of the guys said the person living in that house did something to his family and they took it as an opportunity to get away in their car that was still running. When they were gone, I rang the doorbell at the house to tell them what happened and they should keep an eye out. This is how you end up like that kid in Breaking Bad. My mom used to live in a small town in the Cascade Mountains and worked as a forest ranger. The creepiest thing that happened was when the oldest male ranger kept hitting on her and trying to get her to come home with him. Not very out of the ordinary. But many years later, after she left the town, she found out he had been convicted of manslaughter and had killed a young female ranger right before she got hired. She would have probably been his next target. I don't think there's a story in English to share here. But a Brazilian living in the UK starting seeing a guy. They become boyfriends but didn't work out. Some years later he decided to stalk the guy. Turn out he became a serial killer who killed males of the age of this guy. Some friends and I were fishing a small pond just after dark for catfish. We started to hear sounds coming off the water like someone throwing softball-sized rocks. But they were coming from all over the pond. We thought someone was messing with us and we called out a few times for them to stop. But we eventually got freaked out and left. Cut to a few years later. I'm fishing a different pond and hear the same sound. Turns out it was a beaver slapping its tail on the water to drive me from its territory. When beavers become problems in rivers, they relocate them to ponds in town. Sounds like the tail slapping worked. I've been fishing out in the Gulf of Mexico where they have some oil rigs. This rig wasn't being used, from what we knew, so we would get pretty close to it to fish for red snapper. While we were out there, we could have sworn we heard screams of a woman over and over. It was some crap, but the explanation was the wind making the noises as it blew through the rig. Well, that's what we were told, but it totally creeped us the frick out. I work as a polar bear guard, as in, I escort people across tundra and mountains and protect them from polar bears. I once saw a snowman totem with reindeer antlers coming out of his head. It was deformed, full of bullet holes and rather creepy. I work off a secluded wooded area here in Texas. Every now and again when I finish with a job site, I'll pop into the head office. It's the creepiest feeling at night. Mostly no light and I've seen a bobcat a couple of times. The kicker is, the walls are all glass, so when I have the light on inside, I know I'm being watched by someone or something. Spent a summer in Wyoming going to BLM land and other remote locations collecting data on bats and herpetofauna. Heard a lot of weird noises like mountain lions screaming, deer snorting, what sounded like owls fighting. Woke up one morning to find 2 bull moose sleeping 20 yards behind my tent. All of this was part of the job until one night a truck was driving towards us when we were on a BLM square in the southwestern part of the state. The truck was going overland, no road, and was slowly driving at us. It stopped about 100 yards away, turned off the lights, and we could see a person get out. They walked a full circle around us at 100 yards away, got back in the truck and turned around. This was after dark and this shadowy figure did a complete circle around us. You could hear them walking through the sagebrush and I'm sure they could hear us talking. We packed up after that and drove to a hotel an hour away. I called the office and told them I was taking a gun when we went back out. Didn't like having the bear mace as our only defense. You were probably just on some BLM land that someone had land rights to, and they weren't notified BLM people were going to be on their land. Certainly a creepier approach than when I've ran out to see who's on the land, but to each their own. I used to work in the Gulf of Mexico on oil rigs for years, and it may not exactly be creepy, but I found it really unsettling. In deep, open water, the water itself is really clear, so everyone can plainly see all the tuna and barracudas hanging around the rig waiting for the on-board cook to throw off whatever food waste he needs to. Every once in a while a huge great white shark would swim up from underneath and snatch a tuna, and it really took like less than a second. They're really scary. I worked for a guy that spearfished underneath the rigs out in the Gulf. He said it was perfect since there were tons of fish underneath, and the sharks would never go between the legs, just wait for a fish to leave. Plus the view was amazing, looking down and seeing nothing but abyss. He loved it. I can only imagine how scared I would be. My parents live pretty far back in the country and have one neighboring house. The neighbors would let their basset hound outside for about 10 minutes to use the bathroom every morning. One morning they let him out, and he didn't come back inside. After a couple minutes they walked out to his favorite bathroom spot, and found his head. Judging from the tracks, a mountain lion had ambushed him and apparently torn his head off before carrying the body away. What I thought was the creepiest part was that the family hadn't heard a sound. Spent a summer doing conservation work out in the absolute middle of nowhere in Wyoming. Was part of a crew that would spend 2 weeks camping in remote places to do manual labor in places machines couldn't get to. For this story, we were building new biking trails in the back portion of a designated wilderness area in a high-altitude desert. This means that the nearest civilization was a 2-hour car ride to a town of 41 people in a sandy soil area where tracks last forever. It was the middle of our stint during the early part of the night where everyone else had gone to bed, but I stayed up to read. So maybe 11:30 or so. Still pitch black outside. Clouds had covered stars, so my headlamp was probably the only light on in a 40-mile radius. Suddenly I hear footsteps walking around our camp and head towards the tents from where I was in the community tent. That sound immediately put me on edge as I felt the hair on my arms raise and my adrenaline spike. I recall thinking to myself that two things are very wrong, since the person was not using a light to see and the footsteps were not coming towards me from the tents. Rather it was the opposite. Within the 4 seconds it took me to drop my book, get up, and turn the corner of the tent to cast my light on the sleeping tents. The sound had stopped, but I saw tracks in dirt before me. Looked like they came from one end of camp. Looked into my tent, walked through the sleeping tents and kept going out of camp again. I don't know if I was making too much noise or not by walking around, but the rest of my crew ended up waking up and asking me what was going on from inside their tents. After explaining what I found, they all got up to look at the boot prints in the dirt. They were dang near perfect copies of my own boots except for one small thing. I had a rock stuck in my treads that messed up the symmetry. I was wearing fairly common work boots, except I also happened to wear US size 15 double wide boots, so there was no way in heck this was one of the other crew members. I don't think any of us slept much that night. Never saw or heard anything more after that night. A light rain removed the tracks a couple days later, but I do remember none of us were willing to step on the prints themselves and choose to step over them like cracks in the sidewalk. I work on large ships. If you get a clear view of a hall or passage that runs the whole length, you can actually see the whole ship warp and twist with the sea. If the passage isn't very well lit, it can look like a scene from a horror movie. I've worked in Canada's north for a few years now in oil and gas. It's pretty creepy when during night shift you realize a moose has just been standing at the tree line staring you down for an unknown length of time. Or finding bear tracks crossing the tracks you just made 5 minutes ago. Honestly, the silence of a snowy forest in the dead of night 100s of km away from anything is pretty spooky. When your only contact to the outside world is a radio channel nobody's listening to, you feel pretty alone. Might as well be in space. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.